Hi there and a very warm welcome to this video. Long time no see. I got ill after FMX and I'm still recovering, but I hope this is good enough for another video now. So we are going to take a look at our watch model one more time. So we went through the CAD modeling phase into export, import, and this time we are going to shade it inside of Cinema 4D and Octane. So without further ado, let's grab your coffee and let's jump right in. This spot is usually reserved for the What's Up section where we go over what I've been doing lately, but since I have been ill, there's not a lot to say about that. All I'm going to do is say thank you for the people at FMX that recognized me and had some nice words for me. Thank you. As you can see, playing in the background, the watch has some additional details as the watch hands and the wristband. We won't be modeling nor shading those, but I provide those as a model in the description down below so you can add it to your watch model. Let's continue where we left off last time, the imported watch model inside of Cinema 4D. Small shout out if you want to get access to the scene files we are using today, as well as other scene files we have used in the past. You can see some of them flashing by. Then I will be very happy to welcome you to my Patreon. As you can see, there's a lot of variety in the scene files, smaller ones where you can dive into details such as the materials, and larger ones where you can see how I built up the scene, such as the magnifying glass here or the printed circuit board LED one. And even if you don't want to become a member, I'm delighted to tell you that there are some freebies waiting for you as well, as for example this material ball scene that you can use to test your own materials, but it also comes with a large variety of materials that you also can use on your projects or dissect what I did to them to make them look realistic. Thanks for sitting through this and considering. Now on with the show. And welcome to Shading Land. If we look at our original watch, you can see that a lot of its surfacing is made out of anisotropy. If you don't know exactly what anisotropy is, I have a dedicated video on that in the upper right corner if you're interested. So when I shade an object, what I usually look for first is what materials are used on this object the most. In this case, it would be the metallic anisotropy. With this in mind, I'm going to make a master material for the anisotropy, which we then later can split off other materials and therefore save time in the creation process. What I want to do first is take care of some lighting. So what I'm going to do is go to Objects and get a texture environment as well as a HDRI environment. In the HDRI environment, make sure you go inside of the image texture, otherwise you end up with a wrong gamma, and then bring in your HDRI. And in my case, this is our trusted Maxim Ross HDRI interior. Also, because we are shading, we don't want to have a color influence, so what we are going to do is set this from normal to float to make it black and white. In the image environment, we are going to set this to black, so zero it out basically, and then also set it to visible environment. And let's see if everything worked out. Drum roll, and yes. Let's go and hit the toggle info because we don't need the render info down in the bottom. Let's start our material creation process by going to materials and create a metallic material. And then unexpectedly assign it to the glass because this gives us a great surface where we can see what we are actually doing. Let's actually activate our nodes, and what I'm going to do is bring in some variation here in the form of a dirt texture that you're going to know because I always use the same one. Also, let's turn on snapping because I like the precision and then plug that into the specular. And you can see something here. We are seeing this because our CAD import came in with some UV maps. Now, if you're not explicitly tell the CAD program what to do with those UVs, they're usually useless. So let's delete them here and then go with a cubic projection instead. Now, to be honest, I'm not too keen on cubic mapping either, so I'm going with a more carefree option, which is triplanar mapping. If you don't know about triplanar mapping, I have a dedicated video on this as well in the upper right corner. So let's make the surface imperfections triplanar by going to projection, set the projection to triplanar here, and bring in a triplanar node as well. Here we go. Let's plug it in between those both. And now what we need, since the projection here is rather large, by also cleaning up, let's go with a transform and set the transform to 0.01. Here we go. Last but not least, what I want to do is go to the Triplanar and set the blend angle from 5 to 25. Now, usually I don't use the output of our setup in the specular, but in the roughness, as this gives us a very nice material variation. Though, of course, it's much too strong for an industrial product. So if you know me, I in the past used the Octane gradient to map this, but I now switch to using a range. So let's go and pipe this through here and have a look. Let's say we want to have a 0.1 variation around the roughness value of 0.5. So what I'm going to do is 0.4 here and 0.6 down here. Now it's hard to see, but if we change perspective, you can see there's some slight variation now here. That's much more close to what an industrial product would look like. Maybe it's still too strong though. Since this is our master material, I want to add one more thing to our roughness workflow, and this is a fall-off. This is because some of the materials have the tendency to get more glossy towards the grazing angle, and we are going to implement this here. To do so, we want to add a multiply, then get rid of the display, and then multiply the output of the range with the output of the fall-off, and then get this into the roughness. Now the result is the inverse of what we actually want. Right now we get more glossy the more we get away from the grazing angle. So in order to invert that, we just need to invert the min and max value here. And now if I change my camera angle, you can see it's actually working. We can make the effect a little bit stronger by going to the skew factor here and setting it to 1. But this would be too strong. So let's go and set it back to 6. And actually, this material on our watch doesn't exhibit too much of this behavior. So let's go to the minimum value and set this up to 0.5. Next, since this should be an anisotropic material, what we are going to do is set up the grooves with a noise. And we are going to use a Octane noise here. Now, if we plug it to the bump directly, it's very strong. So what we need to do is get another range. Here we go. Not sure why it turned white, maybe a small bug here. What we want to do is go from 0 to 0.005. We don't see it right now, but if we make our noise smaller, then it will be visible again. This time we are not following the usual way in going with a UVW to XYZ projection, because the anisotropy later on our material is following the orientation of our UVs, so we need to have the noise also follow them. So what I'm going to do is going just for a transform here, unlock the aspect ratio and give it very extreme values, 0.001 here and 100 for the other two. Now, since we are using UVs and Octane acts in a way that the projection from Cinema 4D is given as UVs to Octane, we need to adjust our mapping a little bit here. The easiest way to do that is to right click and then fit to object. But this gives us very small values, so I ended up tweaking it a little bit and gone with 3 by 3 by 3 centimeters. What this reveals is that the noise looks a little bit repetitive, so what we can do is go to the noise and set it from Perlin to circular. Since the bump is still looking a little bit big, there's multiple ways we can deal with that. One would be further lowering the output maximum of the range. Since we are dealing with a very small scene scale though, what I opt for is going to the material, its bump, and set the bump height here to 0.001. Here we go. Now, while we are at the material settings, let's go back to basic, and instead of the BRDF model Octane, let's go with GGX or GGX energy preserving. Since we are going for anisotropy and Octane doesn't have a anisotropy mode. So while we are still at the main material, let's find the anisotropy option and dial it in. It's a little bit like diffuse, values up to 1 give a rather strange result, so I opt for 0.8 here. Now there's one thing happening that is not kosher. If you watched the anisotropy tutorial before, the lines of the anisotropy and the stretching of the highlights always are 90 degrees offset. But for us right now, they're both aligning. So what we have to do as a last thing is go to the transform here and set the R, so the rotation of the Z-axis, to 90. And now if we move our camera around, you can marvel at the nice anisotropy effect we are getting. I couldn't have chosen a better angle to show you, and you can see that the anisotropy sort of accentuates the roughness variation here. So let's actually dial in the values a little bit better, and I already know what values I like to have here. 0.44 and 0.46, so revolving around 0.45. And this is with a very minimal variation. We are already almost done with our material. If you paid attention, you can see that the reflection is very bright and the reflection value here is at 1. So what I want to do is also get a little bit of variance in there, mainly by duplicating the range and feeding it with the same noise. We need to change our values here from 0.5 to 0.6 and then feed that into the specular. And as you can see, this helps us getting a nice brushed metal look. This is our master material for our linear anisotropy, but where there's linear anisotropy, usually there's always rotational anisotropy, so we also have to do this one. And believe it or not, I also have a tutorial on this, so upper right corner if you're interested. Now let's bring this material home by naming it. What I did here is a very convenient name as the material, the albedo it uses, the roughness it uses, and last but not least, it's a linear anisotropy with the level of 80. This helps me to see what the material is made of in one glance without diving into the nodes. And look at this, a reload of the node tree has solved our range map color issue. Nice. To get going, let's duplicate the material, give it its right name, any rot, and then also go in here in the nodes and get the right things going, namely the rotation gradient. What we need to go for is a gradient generator with a couple of settings in place. So let's attach it to the rotation. Then what we need to do is go instead of linear to angular. The gamma should be 1 and also it should be inverted. Now to see something, let's apply the material, but this is not right yet. We are missing one more step, and this is by going to the transform and adding it here with the rotation Z-axis moved by 90 degrees. Now the anisotropy is rotating, but our noise is not, so how can we make the noise rotate? If the following feels a little bit glossed over, you can get more details in one of my tutorials. Yes, I made another tutorial about the rotational noise. So upper right corner if YouTube lets me, if not, it's down in the description below. For this to work, we are going to need a projection on the noise. So let's get the projection going and actually set it to color to UVW. To bend the noise around, we need more gradients. Here we go, let's duplicate that 2 times. Then set one of those gradients to radial. To bring them together, we need a channel merger. So here we go. Then plug one of the gradients into the red channel, the other one in the green, and the result of that into the texture. And now what you should see is a radial noise. Before we go on, there's one more small thing I need to tweak, and this is in the anisotropy directly. I want to go with 0.7 here. Also, let's update that in the materials naming. Here we go. Now the next thing is a little bit tedious and also might be a little bit boring, as we are going to split up the object's polygons into ones that are assigned to the linear anisotropy and ones that are assigned to the rotational anisotropy. There are actually a couple of tricks helping the selection process, especially if you have very symmetrical objects. Let's choose the bezel and solo it to show it there. One of the fastest ways to get there is to utilize fields in the selection. So to get a selection, we need to go into polygon mode, select, and then store selection. And in the tag properties, go to fields. Let's delete the freeze because it doesn't contain any useful information. And in the fields here, choose a shader field. Let's undock this window because it gets a little bit squeezed here. Then in the shader field, go to effects and choose a Cinema 4D Falloff. And now if we double click on the selection, you can see only the up-facing polygons are selected. Now the selection is a little bit excessive and goes right up to the rim, but we can control that by going inside of the Falloff and moving the black container here to the right, so around 60%. And if we now double click again, you can see now some of the polygons that are still facing upwards have been left unselected. And last but not least, if you want the top and bottom side selected, what you can do is duplicate the field here, then go into the second field's Falloff and just reverse the axis to -1, then bring it inside of the tags field and set it to max, for example. And now if we double click, then the top and the bottom portion is selected. Now, while the bezel is a perfect object to show off the field selection, it's actually not useful here because it's made out of different materials. So while the inside is still heavily brushed, the outside is very polished. What we need to do is actually make a manual selection. And the good thing is that due to the export process through MOI, it's also not that difficult to do. So what we can actually do is utilize the loop selection, so UL, to loop around a certain part. This wouldn't be possible with the traditional triangular import that, for example, Cinema 4D is doing. So to finally get somewhere, let's make a selection for all the polygons that are associated with the roughly brushed linear anisotropy. Let's go with this one here, this one, and maybe this one as well, and then move to the other side. And I think that is it for now, because all the other parts are either the rotational anisotropy or a different material altogether. Let's actually get somewhere with the material. So what we want to do is get our linear anisotropy and assign it to our selection. To show you what I generally want to do, let's drag it on the object first, so it's not assigned to the selection. This looks a bit wild. If we go to material mode and zoom out, you can see it is box projected with a very large box. In this case, this is not what we want, so let's go to the coordinates and set it smaller, so 3 by 3 by 3 as we established before. If you look closely, this still looks a little bit wild. This is the reason why we want to actually map it cylindrically. Here we go. If we now move close, we have a very nicely shaded object. In this case, it almost works all around the object. The exclusion is the bottom because it faces straight down and therefore gets no projection. But we want to have it assigned to a selection anyway. So let's call the selection first, Anilin for example, and then assign the tag to that. Here we go. And now that should be nice and working. Of course, what I forgot is that we still are using fields. So let's delete those fields and switch our field back to off, and then actually go to the bezel and assign the selection that we did by going here to commands and then update. Here we go. Finally, we are there. Let's make a selection to apply the rotational anisotropy here. And this is mostly on the bottom. Now, we could also do that with the loop selection, funny enough. But there's also an alternative method to select stuff, which is the Phong break selection. So if we select this, let's go closer to this edge here. We are missing this one strip. So let's select this and then also this strip here. So we don't have any gap between the selections. Let's store the selection again, select and then store selection. I have made myself a shortcut to not always go into that menu. Then call this AniRod and finally add the material to that. Now this material can be box projected, which is done right here. But we also want to make it a little bit smaller, so 3 by 3 by 3. And now you have a good addition to the bottom. Very nice. As we need different materials for the rest of the object, the time has come to branch off our materials. So what we need to do is duplicate them and then alter them. What I want to alter first is the anisotropy, so we go with 10% as the material here should be more glossy. Using the nodes for managing multiple materials at the same time is not possible, so the best next thing you can do is go to the attributes. So next we want to adjust the glossiness or the roughness, then go into the roughness and then into the range. Since both of the materials have the same nodes, this is possible. So what we want to do is go way down with the roughness 0.04 to 0.06. Here we go. Let's go back and do the same thing with the bump, because this is now much too strong as well. Let's go inside of the range, add a 0, and instead of 5, let's go with a 1. Here we go. Let's finally make a selection to assign the material, again with the funk break selection, this and this, for the rotational anisotropy. With box/cubic mapping, you have to be a little bit careful to not go over 45 degrees, otherwise you get shading errors, because then the projection from another angle can creep in. The only thing I want to add here though is this little strip. Let's store the selection and then call it Anisotropy and drag the rotational material on it. Make sure the coordinates are smaller, 333, and also duplicate the linear anisotropy here, then delete the tag name out of it and exchange it with the linear, more glossy anisotropy. And there we go. This should be our vessel finished. Just to avoid confusion, we could have made an extra selection for that, but right now all the parts that are not selected are for the leftover material here that we assigned. Alrighty, one part finished. I will not go through all of the other parts one by one. I will work through them, and when I think there's something interesting to tell you, I will record that bit. Otherwise, I have the fear this video will be very long and boring. On the main watch case, I selected everything that's supposed to be a linear anisotropy with the funk break selection and a rather small angle. Now I want the selection to go a little bit over the edge in the best way possible. So what we can do is go to selection and then grow selection, or UY. Now there are some parts that might look a little bit flaky, but usually they are so small that you don't notice them. What we also can do is steal the selection and map material from a other object, move it down to the watch case or duplicate it to the watch case and then go to the selection and update that. Here we go. Now we have a very nice linear anisotropy going here. And wait, I'm not finished. Initially I did that way more complicated. So what you can do is just copy this material, delete the selection out of there, and then instead of cylindrical, go with spherical. I did the upper half spherical on my original watch, but I noticed that it works all the way around. So this way you can easily texture just the main watch case. Sometimes, dependent on the mesh, and especially if you're working with anisotropy, Octane can create some artifacts, as you can see here. Those are usually caused by n-gons on edges. The medicine against them is to inner extrude the edge. So here what works is funk break select the edge, make sure everything is selected, otherwise you run into more artifacts than before. Here we go, something like that. Then inner extrude by hitting E with a very small value like this. And then your artifacts are usually gone. If you still have some artifacts like here, those are caused by the bump. So if we get rid of the bump completely, also that gets rid of the artifacts. Now you have to find a balance between a good bump and the artifacts showing up. I think 0.005 in our case is okay, because they're barely visible. For the case back, I made selections for the rotational anisotropy as for the linear ones, and then used a different material that I branched off and made really rough without anisotropy for the holes. For the crown, especially the front, what I did is selected it and branched off another of those materials, made it low roughness and also no anisotropy. The outer part of the crown is basically the same material, but with a little bit more roughness applied. And for the back part of the crown, I used the low roughness anisotropy material to have a little bit of a structure there. Alrighty, this is the outside of the watch done. We are missing some engravings, but all of the details in the textures are already there. Very nice. So what we are missing is, for example, the watch face and of course the glass. And the glass is very easy to do. let's do it real quick. We are not going to put fingerprints on that, so let's go in materials and then go with the specular material, then just assign it to the glass here. Here we go. And as a short bonus at the end of the video, to shorten the wait for the shading of the engravings as well as the watch face, I have linked down in the description, available for everyone, for my Google Drive, the wristband and the watch hands. So let's bring this in here. All you need to do is to copy it into your scene, and if you modeled correctly, then everything should match up nicely. And the quick-witted among you probably have spotted it already. I rigged those hands with a user interface, so if you press play, the second hand here is moving, as well as the other hands. Of course, they are moving slower, and you can set your time that you want. So you can go with 11 o'clock or 5 o'clock or something like that. And also the date is moving accordingly, as long as you stay at January 1970. This is because calculating dates is inherently hard, so I just didn't care and just go with the first month of the epoch. And this was it for this week. As a bonus, I included the watch face in the file you can download, so you can try shading that on your own if you want, or wait until the next tutorial. By the way, I'm thinking about rescheduling my release from Sunday evening to Tuesday morning German time. I want to hear your opinion in the comments what you think about that. Now, as always, let's thank those people who made this video possible, my Patreons. Especially my €50 tier subscribers, Chiels Augustinen and Leon Studio TV. Also, of course, a huge thank you for my €15 tier subscribers, Doi Jim. For the Thieves, Render King, Alessandro Bonchio, Alessio De Vecchi, Ami Schiedried, BVR, Christian Grajewski, Erbe Plus Academy, Joel Mackemer, John Edward, Chris Clemson, Ness Graphics, Nico Straub, Part 1 of 2, Ralf, Reiko, Reshock, Shamus Johnson, Shiro 2049, Terry Wayne Ranson, Jan Verbeeke, and Yassin Rupp. Hi there and welcome to the after show. Finally a new tutorial. It has been a while. I know that the series here isn't very well watched, but I want to finish it anyway, so hopefully it's worth the while for some of you. Also, as I said in the beginning, I am still not completely recovered, so I needed to stretch this out to 2 days of production, so I couldn't meet the Sunday evening deadline. But the good thing is that there is a new tutorial. So yeah. Now back to the roots. If you want to help me fight against the algorithm overlords, let's post a Dizzy in the comments down below. I thought this looks a little bit like a rotational sparkling anisotropy. Other than that, I wish you a fantastic start into the week, a great week ahead, and if you're watching this later, simply a good time. With this, I say thanks again and happy mapping. Bye!